Good afternoon. My name is Lonnie Douglas. I'm with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network. Tom?
And I'm Thomas Brown with the ESSN Solidarity Action Network. And we're here with Ben Ricker, who is running for Eugene mayor. Would you like to make a statement, Ben?
Yeah, I want to start by saying I've been noticing lawn signs for Mayor Venice, and they say Mayor Venice, the progressive choice. And I was thinking about this last night and realized she's the most conservative candidate in this race, small c conservative, but everybody running against her is further to her left. So I wanted to open by pointing that out merely because I think it's...
So Ben, just so you know, we're trying to stay focused on you, and because Mayor Venice isn't here to be able to counter or anything.
Yeah.
We just want to focus on you and not any of the other candidates. Is okay?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think to have this conversation without discussing the incumbent would be almost impossible. But if you'd like me to just sort of move on to who I am now.
Yeah. We want to know about you. Definitely.
Yeah, well, part of who I am is I'm very, very disappointed in incumbents who are running for re-election right now. So I hear you, and I will do my best to be civil, but not talking about what's been going on for the last 4 years would be very difficult for me. So I am Ben Ricker. I'm running for Eugene mayor, as I said, because I'm disappointed in the current mayor. This is a primary election, so there's no harm in voting for somebody other than the mayor. There's no fear. The primary election is about determining who will run through till November. I'm running with a handful of other people. We are running on the same platform. It's called the Solidarity Platform. Our website is solidarityplatformeugene.org. We are running on a platform that emphasizes human rights, climate urgency. We are interested in making sure that Eugene's democracy is more open and more transparent. We value economic models that are regenerative, and we also want to create conversations about decolonization. The role of the mayor in Eugene is often a tie-breaking vote. I think that means the mayor can use his or her time to be the loudest champion in the city for the causes he or she believes in. And I would, as mayor, prioritize reversing ordinances and tweaks to city code that make life harder for the people who are already struggling the hardest. I'm talking about ordinances like the dog ban. I'm talking about ordinances that the city debated like the panhandling ban or the anti-panhandling ordinance, as well as a recent decision the city made to make it harder for homeless people to sleep on stretches of public soil known as planting strips. So my particular interest in the Solidarity Platform is the human rights plank. And I'm mostly here hoping that this message will reach members in the news media who may agree with me that this is something worth looking into as we decide who will be our next mayor. I really want anybody listening to this to ask themselves if they've seen adequate coverage of this race. I hope they agree with me that it has been disappointing.
Yeah. Well, we'll move into our first question, but I am going to interject one little comment there. I do agree with you on that the news coverage of the elections and getting all of the candidates' messages out in the media has been really lacking. I mean, the Weekly's done a good job. The Register Guard has done a little bit, but because you're not able to knock on doors, I think it's much more important. That's one of the reasons we're doing. That's really why we're doing these forums. So you bring up a really good point that I'd like to just say that we do definitely second it, and that's why we're doing these. So.
I'd like to know what you mean by the Eugene Weekly has done a good job. They just released their endorsement issue, and there's practically no information in it. I know that the candidates all filled out questionnaires. They spent their time filling out questionnaires, which would have helped enlighten voters as to who these challengers are. And none of those got published in the paper because the paper has been very slim lately. But and online, I was told they would appear online, and I haven't seen them there yet. So,
so maybe they're not doing as well as I thought they were.
And yeah, I'm not. I mean, we could talk about it. I think it's just that I think they could do better, at least in that one specific regard, providing those answers online so people could read about Zondi Zinke and Robert Patterson, who, unfortunately is not listed in the voters pamphlet, but is a great candidate and one who has like really, I think, compassionate ideas, good ideas. I think he'd make a great leader. I've spoken with him a couple of times and I have a lot of faith in him. So there's almost no way to find out about him without the newspapers doing their job.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pull us off track there, but no, I just thought you made a very good point. So,
thank you. Yeah.
Tom, do you want to start us off with the first question?
Yeah, I'll do that because the second question you can do, that's your baby. So, yeah, it doesn't take a crystal ball to see that the current recession will exacerbate Eugene's affordable housing crisis and force yet even more residents onto the streets. How will you respond to the immediate spike in homelessness and housing instability, and what measures will you take over the long term to help Eugene's unhoused?
Yeah. So how do you address the coming wave of misery, and on down the line, how do you work to reduce it in a more sustained way? Yeah, I agree with your question. I think more people are going to find themselves in increasingly tight positions, and people are going to fall off the bottom rung into homelessness. Short term, I think the city can and should make sure that the people living here all have access to food, shelter, clean water, and electricity. I know the city can do that. The city, well, we can leave part of that answer for another. I know the city can do that. It's just a matter of priorities. And I think given, the world, the emergency we live in, I'm seeing some recognition on the part of the city that this is a vital function of theirs. And I think they are doing their best. I think that it's impossible for me not to notice that if we had been tackling these problems as the emergencies they were before COVID-19, if we'd recognized these as emergencies before COVID-19, we'd be on much better footing to handle this problem as it's being made worse by a pandemic. And in terms of long term, I mean, there are so many people who come to city council meetings to offer ideas and solutions that the city hasn't yet considered. There's a wealth of great ideas that come forward, that I've witnessed come forward in city council meetings, and I would love to see those tried. I mean, we need to consider all of our options, and the ones we've been trying up until now that don't appear to be even keeping up with the problem as it stands. So the city needs new ears, it needs new eyes, new voices to address this problem. And I think collaboration, I mean, the city needs to work with these people, with folks who are homeless, to help address their needs and the needs of the whole population.
Mm-hmm. So I have a follow-up for that. They put, I live out in the Churchill or Bethel neighborhood right over by Peterson Barn Park. And they just put there are some people out here that are unhoused. The city put up, and there's blue canvassing around the camp and stuff. And I'll go out in the park and walk about the park and stuff. And I mean, it doesn't seem to me like it's that intrusive. It's that it's not. I mean, the way they set it up seems to work really well. But I know that those things will cost, to do things like that after the pandemic will cost, some amount of money. So the things that they're putting in place, how are you proposing that we raise more funds? Because we obviously need to raise more funds, not just for unhoused, but for housing in general and a lot of other stuff. But how would you raise more funds for programs like that if we want to continue them?
Yeah, well, that's a huge question and a major part of why I'm running. You know, as I mentioned, I'm running to raise awareness about ordinances the city has used to hurt or disadvantage people who are already, you know, in terrible situations. I think the city, first and foremost, could begin changing the story just by acknowledging these people and their right to exist, and their right to exist in places where we may find them uncomfortable at times, but they have to have a place to be. So if we had a mayor who is like a vocal advocate for these people and tried, you know, or spent his or her time reaching out with this message to people who are uncomfortable with them living nearby or who may not want to prioritize that spending, I think you would begin to make a meaningful difference to bringing about, like, anytime you hear a government complain that it doesn't have the money, what it really is saying is that we don't have that prioritized highly enough. We had the money. I mean, we're going to get to the payroll tax, but when the city decided it wanted to spend that money primarily on more policing, I mean, it raced to make that money available through a very undemocratic process. But nonetheless, like, it prioritized that and it made it happen. And I believe that if it prioritized meeting the needs and making comfortable as possible those people who sleep outside in winter, it could do that, and it would do that. And I'd rather live in a city where that's where the effort was placed.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah, the Eugene Weekly had a article. I just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of it, but evidently the EPD is still clearing homeless encampments, and but it doesn't. I don't think that's something they should be doing in this atmosphere of uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think that point talks to like how we sometimes like we talk about the homeless as if they're like one blob of humanity that all behaves the same or has the same priorities. I mean, they're people like you and I, like the housed, right? Like, are all housed people one kind of people? I mean, there are unhoused people who'd rather live outside of one of these like sort of sanctioned public sort of encampments, you know, that the city has, I think, very graciously set up. Or I should say appropriately set up. I think that's the city's job. It doesn't enter into this sort of extra credit zone of grace. But like, I would say that yes, it is okay with me that some homeless people want to live in their own camps right now and not go to places that the city has set aside for them. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Tom.
So moving on to the second question. So last June, and you touched a little bit on it, last June the city council voted to implement a payroll tax in Eugene for safety services. We understand the need for services, but can you but they also voted, these are very regressive taxes, and they voted to not refer that very controversial tax to the voters. So can you kind of give us your opinion on payroll taxes in general, and also how you feel about them not allowing us to vote on it?
Yeah, I got to be careful, because if you start me on this particular subject, I could maybe go on for several days without realizing it. That was a disaster. The payroll tax and its passage really highlighted for me the broken trust in Eugene and how the city was kind of willing to break it over and over again. The city council, I was there for the meetings, discussed it as though they understood that it was going to be unpopular and that may not pass if they let it up to the voters. They passed it fully aware that groups would try to petition to fight it. And they passed it anyway. I think that is undemocratic. And I think that is a very serious problem when the city produces like undemocratic outcomes. I think it hurts the trust. It hurts their ability to accomplish any of their goals. You know, if people don't believe that the city is acting in good faith with their interests at heart. More generally on payroll taxes, I could be convinced to support one. I think the next mayor should work to reverse this one, or at least restructure it so that it doesn't cut so deeply into the incomes of people who are earning very little in our city. And I would restructure it so that more of the money went to services to support those in need. You know, as your first question points out, like a lot more people are going to be in need of services soon. And that tax is going to raise around $23 million. I think there are better ways to spend it than on merely hiring more police and giving sort of lip service to services that help the homeless and people who are in situations that are desperate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you have any follow-up for that one, Tom?
Not right now. Perhaps when you're mayor.
Okay.
And I could go on if you guys would grant me the extra ranting and raving.
Yeah. I'll give you I'll give you another we'll give you another another 2 minutes on it. How's that sound?
Yeah. Stop me if I'm like beginning to froth at the mouth or anything. Yeah. Another problem I'm noticing with Eugene, I mean, I didn't make this clear in my intro, but I go to city council meetings because I cannot get vital information anywhere else. I find that I have to go to the source. When I go there, I see the city turning away from criticism more and more. I'm running, as I mentioned, with several other candidates. I met Zondi Zinke, who is also running for mayor and who would make an excellent mayor, in my opinion. I met her after that public forum that was specifically about the payroll tax. She brought with her a printout of a day's sort of a, what do you call it, like a docket of the municipal court. And it was a long list. She had 2 minutes to read it, and she read it as fast as she could. It was a long list of open container violations and trespass violations. And I think that criticism that, you know, maybe this spending on police could be spent elsewhere, and that the police time going into writing these citations could be better spent, never got a response from the city council. They do not address these concerns, and they passed the payroll tax without ever any meaningful discussion of Zondi's point in particular, but many of the other excellent points that were raised against it. At that public forum, there was a large crowd, a standing room only crowd, and like the vast majority of that crowd was very strongly opposed to the payroll tax. And it seemed to mean nothing to our city councilors and our mayor. And that, I think that indicates a serious problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That and was a city manager that's appointed, not elected.
Tom, huge issue, right? Like the one of the most influential positions in the city is not a democratically elected position. And a couple years ago, in the last election, voters in good faith effort tried to create some accountability with a measure to create and fund an independent office for a city auditor. And the city actively undermined that measure with its own ordinance. Voters should not forget that the city actively undermined a good faith effort on the part of voters and citizens to create some government accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
We
Tom,
ready
you
for
want to hit the next question?
Yeah. Eugene has one of the worst affordable housing shortages in the country. What approach should the city take to resolve our housing crisis?
We talked a little bit a moment ago about sort of short-term and long-term solutions to the affordable housing crisis. The city seems to be leaning exclusively on sort of market-driven solutions to this problem. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think public housing is an option that the city has not yet explored enough. And I think, again, I mentioned that like people come forward at public forum to bring new ideas, and I'm often very dismayed that the city doesn't take those ideas more seriously and explore them. I'm a fan of housing first models, and more spent on support services for people who need them, to help them get on their feet, those who want to. People who don't want to spend money on affordable housing, or I'm sorry, public housing, or extremely inexpensive housing, will often say that, like, well, some homeless people want to be homeless. And to them, I say, yeah, so what? I mean, plenty of them don't. And I think we should primarily work to help those people who don't want to be homeless stop being homeless. Being homeless, to me, looks often really miserable and lonely when you see people who are, passed out in odd and uncomfortable looking places in the middle of winter. I mean, it's such a callous response to assume that those people prefer that when we haven't even offered them an avenue for exiting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So our next question, sorry, my screen went a little kablooey on me. Our next question is along kind of the same lines with housing, but a little different. The need to incentivize affordable housing development can place landowners and developers, which we label in one group, and affordable housing activists or low-income housing activists and labor groups in another group. You can place these groups at odds. How would you manage the conflict between these groups, specifically the wealthy developers, the 1%, and the rest of the community?
Yeah. I want to say we sort of recorded an interview before that got lost in the internet ether, but I had a really good zinger in there, and I'm going to retread it just for fun. I think the 1% should get 1% of a public servant's attention and consideration. We call them the 1% because they have an inordinate concentration of wealth and power. That power comes in the form of access to public officials and the means to create outcomes that they desire. I don't understand why it should be a public official's job to court them or make their lives any easier when we have so many people who, like we've talked about, are sleeping outside in the mud and in the rain in wintertime. It seems, well, again, it's one I should sort of be careful not to rant about, but yes, I do not think that the needs of the 1% are the consideration of public servants.
Okay. Tom, any follow-up with that?
No.
How do you, so when we're talking about this, Ben, how do you feel about, we talk about affordable housing. I prefer low-income housing. What are your views on this idea of affordable housing in our community, which very often low-income workers, working class people are not able to afford the affordable housing?
Yeah.
And how would you address that issue?
Well, that problem exists, I think, for some of the reasons we've already talked about, right? Like, who defines affordable housing? What affordable housing is based on? I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, people who earn close to minimum wage or close to minimum wage could not afford often what the government defines as affordable housing. But that affordable housing measure is often used to grant property tax exemptions to real estate developers. It's part of the reason that I do not trust the private sector to be able to solve our problem. I think our problem is going to require public solutions. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was good.
Yeah, the private market-driven, there's no way they can solve this problem. This has to be a government solved problem.
And the private sector shouldn't feel bad that they can't solve this problem. They're not built to solve this problem. Like
Yeah.
a profit-seeking firm is not designed to be able to offer like extremely lower than market apartments.
Right.
It only does that when it can gain by like some kind of public tax subsidy. I mean, that's our money. We are essentially like giving money to you and I, the people on this call, and anybody listening is giving money to developers
Right.
to provide affordable housing. I mean, does that sound right to you?
Well, it's not their, you're right. I think what it is, it's not their role. It is not the private sector's role to provide low income or affordable housing. It's their role is to make a profit. That is what they're there to do.
Yeah.
So when we expect them, I think you're right. When we expect them to go against what they are actually there to do, they're not going to. And so how, I think, so I'm curious what you're saying. It's, it sounds like you're talking more about the city needing to get into basically the low income housing market or the low income housing business. How would you propose that they do that? Any ideas?
I mean, we talked about like the camps that you see popping up. I mean, that stuff's publicly funded. And like I said, we know that the city can do that because it's doing that now. 2 years ago, the city said it was going to open a winter shelter on the, what is now the Making Space for Justice parking lot.
Yeah.
And I was stunned when I read this news because that seems so counter to what I was accustomed to seeing from the city in terms of solutions on like what we do with people who can't afford housing. And for a day or two, I was examining my own assumptions about the city. I mean, I was really impressed that the city was willing to pledge to make available some dry beds for people who need them in the wintertime. And then several days later, the city revoked that promise. But what that tells me is that it can be done, that the city can erect emergency housing. We have a rest stop program where people, are given essentially like a hut to sleep in on a dry platform at a fixed address. And I, from what I understand, that's a successful program. The people I've spoke with who are a part of that program, I would want them as my neighbors. They're very conscientious neighbors. Those are some of the many solutions that would address the need, which there's a lot of need.
All right.
What do you see the county's role in this problem,
Well,
solving this problem?
yeah.
I'm much less aware of what the county's like limitations are in terms of addressing these problems. I know that the city and the county like work together. I've been to many city council meetings where the city and the county are at the same table. I do have faith in the county. The people I've seen at these meetings strike me as informed and interested in helping. But I'm sorry, Tom. I should just say I don't really know. I'm not particularly versed in what the county.
And you're not running for county commissioner, so it's,
yeah.
You don't really.
But I think it's still a valid question.
To be fair, we're not expecting you to answer things on the county. That would be.
No. The city has to interact with the county, though. That's what
absolutely. And you know what? Like one thing I've encountered recently is the city purchased some real estate to turn into a shelter. I mean, that's the kind of thing I want to see the city doing more of. Purchasing buildings that can be renovated and improved to, just provide places. Pardon me. Just provide places for people to sleep warm at night in a place that is safe. I think that would go a huge way to addressing the problem. As I mentioned, I'm running to draw attention to ordinances the city has used to criminalize homeless, to push them out of sight. Like I've said, the first step is stop doing that. Please stop doing that. But then, finding innovative ways to provide, the basic needs to people who are most vulnerable.
Cool. Tom, you want to follow up with the last question?
Do you want to take the last question, Lonnie?
Sure. Why not? So last question is basically a good one for you to tie up there a little bit. And basically, what is your vision for the city of Eugene and as an elected representative, as mayor, what do you feel your role will be in playing to bring that vision to reality?
Yeah. My vision for Eugene is a city where we all understand that we all belong here and we all have a place here. Nobody is made to feel like an outsider merely because they don't have money or a place to sleep. Um, when you go downtown now, you will see planter boxes with flowers in them, and they're just sort of thrown together and surrounded by like a chain cordon. Those are there to discourage people from sitting and resting on the sidewalk. Before those were there was people sitting there. They had a right to be there, I thought. And oftentimes, when I was downtown and in the mood and with extra time, I would talk with them. And I learned a lot from talking with people from different walks of life that I met in downtown Eugene. I think that's the reason that we live in a city, to come in contact with people who have different backgrounds than us and different experiences than us, and learn about who they are and where they came from. I mean, I had an experience not long ago where I was downtown feeling pretty miserable, kind of depressed. And I was sitting on a bench and I was just sort of doodling and sort of writing out some of my problems. And a fellow came by and struck up a conversation with me. And maybe at first I kind of thought I wished he'd kept going, but after a 5 or 10 minute conversation, I felt like $1 million. Just the exchange we had was so powerful. And I hope it was for him too. And that's the value of living in a city, is just not knowing who you may meet and appreciating that, and going downtown, even if sometimes you find it scary or threatening, or the people there are not people you feel comfortable around. That's more reason to go downtown and encounter life. That's what I like about Eugene. That's what I want to see more of. I think a mayor could help make that happen, as I said earlier, by just changing the story we tell about the people who are downtown. I think the ordinances that criminalize them send a message to everybody that those people are criminal and that they don't belong downtown and they don't have a reason to be there. So they should move along. I want to live in a city where you can just sit down and chat with somebody who you've never met before, from a place you've never been before.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. Do you have a website or anything that you want to plug for your campaign?
Yeah, anybody who wants to should visit solidarityplatformeugene.org. You can read about me and the other candidates running. I want to make another sort of pitch that, like, any vote for one of us is a vote that doesn't go to the incumbent and stands or helps us sort of draw this process out till November, giving, hopefully the news media a chance to vet these candidates and look at their records. That's only a good thing in a democracy. I also want to direct people to check out Robert Patterson. I don't have the name of any websites or anything off the top of my head, but search him. He's done his best, I think, in this COVID-19 sort of shutdown to get his message out there. I think voters would stand only to benefit from reading more about him and what he wants for the city. So yes, thank you for this opportunity to push that stuff.
All right.
We'd like to say that we're happy to be giving this platform to these candidates that cannot get out and campaign in their normal way, knocking on doors and having rallies and such. At the same time, we don't endorse anyone. We're just here giving a platform for everybody to get their message out.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
We're glad to be doing that.
All right.
Yeah, I'm extremely grateful.
Good. And good luck with your campaign. We're really glad to have so many good candidates. It's nice to see so many people running and so many ideas out there. So thank you for speaking up and doing that. All right.
Everybody's bringing their own thing to this. I'm really impressed with it too. I mean, seeing this many people involved in a primary race sort of runs counter to, like, I hear sometimes people say that Eugene is complacent or not very turned on, but, like, man, 7 people? Is it 7? It may even be, it's 7 total, so including the incumbent. I mean, that tells me that Eugene is not complacent. People do care.
I think so. All right. Well, thank you, Ben, and you have a good day. Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah,
you too, gentlemen.
best of luck.
Thank you very much.